I'm James Crossley, one of the academic directors at Sensam, and I gave a summary of the political nature of apocalyptic ideas at the end of the seminar on Cold War and apocalypticism. It should be no surprise that the idea of the apocalypse as a bad thing remained prominent in mainstream and not so mainstream Cold War discourses. It was already something present after 2 world wars, but the Cold War really brought this tradition home. The significance of the idea of the apocalypse as something that must be avoided can be highlighted by a figure like Bertrand Russell. Russell, of course, was a great philosopher of the mid-20th century, but also an atheist and someone committed to the campaign for nuclear disarmament. Why is this significant? Well, it's significant because he turned to the Book of Revelation of all things to describe the impending catastrophe. But this was an apocalypse that wasn't going to have a New Jerusalem. This use of the Book of Revelation in his language was designed to function as a stark warning with disastrous consequences for the world. But the idea of the apocalypse as a good thing, something that could transform the world, would not go away. Already in 1945 in the UK, the Labour Party was using the Book of Revelation in a different way. In its manifesto, it was using this language to talk about building on the rubble of war and bring about something like a New Jerusalem, realised in things like the NHS, the development of the welfare state, the transformation of the UK in Labour political propaganda. However, it did become difficult for the positive apocalyptic vision to thrive in the Cold War for obvious reasons, except, of course, among religious groups, particularly those in America. And perhaps the most obvious example here would be someone like Hal Lindsey and the late great Planet Earth. Is not the Cold War, from this perspective, the best evidence of the end and the transformation of creation and existence itself? Well, not quite. Even here we see that the end can get reinterpreted. When we get to the films of the late great Planet Earth, they reinterpret the books, because once the Cold War is over, the end has to come about by different means. So, for instance, threats come from somewhere close to Iraq and the Middle East rather than necessarily areas associated with Russia and the Soviet Union. But this tension between the good apocalypse and the bad apocalypse continues right through to today. Language is easily reapplied and prophecy easily reinterpreted. The idea of a negative apocalypse, while still present in discussions of nuclear weapons, has been reapplied most thoroughly when it comes to environmentalism. In an era where Islam and the Middle East have become dominant in American-led foreign policy, apocalyptic language has followed suit. In the UK, Tony Blair tried to bring the left wing of the Labour Party along by using that old language of transforming the world after World War II to now justify intervention in Afghanistan and Iraq, and talked about how foreign policy could transform North of Africa and the Middle East and beyond. And as we saw in some of our presentations, 5G and the coronavirus is the latest way of updating this language of apocalypticism in popular culture. But in the UK and in more liberal parts of America, it is the ironic use of apocalyptic language that has really started to take hold. No one really believes in it, not literally. Anyone who does in mainstream politics is perhaps deemed as something like a conspiratorial threat, or believes too much in religion, or is too far outside the mainstream Western consensus. After all, the last thing the fairly narrow liberal spectrum wants is dramatic change. It's striking, therefore, that the most prominent use of apocalyptic language coming from the liberal mainstream has been Francis Fukuyama's work on the end of history. And here it is effectively all those old visions of transformation have come to an end. Now we've just got a future of liberal democracy ahead of us. And this is one of the striking features, perhaps contradictory features, of apocalyptic language in political discourse across the 20th and 21st centuries, is that apocalyptic thought almost represents irrationality in contrast to the rational, reasonable centre. And in this sense, this is a legacy of the Cold War that remains in mainstream political discourse today.